Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Dr. Francavilla Show. Today, we are going to talk about appetite. Specifically, we are going to talk about 7 different components of appetite. You may think, what's there to know? But it turns out there are lots of different things we're talking about when we say the word appetite. And by breaking them down into specific categories, I think you're going to have a much better understanding of what drives you to eat, what might drive you to overeat, or what might drive you to eat the quote wrong foods. Okay. So today we are going to dive into descriptions of what these all are, because I believe knowledge is power. And the more you understand about how your body works and why you might be doing the things you are doing from a biology perspective, the more you can make change that is going to impact your health and impact your weight. So let's go ahead and dive in. The reason why I think this topic is really important is when most people are trying to improve their health and make changes with their weight, they will find that there are foods that they eat too much of. They might find that they eat too frequently. They might feel like they're eating the wrong foods, or they have a desire to eat the wrong foods, and that's really hard to overcome. And there's lots of different solutions to those, which we talk about throughout this podcast. But today we're going to focus on understanding what's driving that eating, what is causing that appetite. And again, I think when you understand what those components are for you, you can start to make some changes. And we'll talk about what those will be today as well. So there are actually 7 different components to appetite, which drive how much we eat, how often we eat, and what we eat. And a lot of times we refer to all of these things as hunger, but we're actually going to talk about hunger first. So hunger is the first component of appetite. And this is simply what we call the drive to eat, which is a bunch of different things, that feeling that you need to eat something. That may be physiologic, like for me, that's sort of a growling in my stomach, a feeling a little tired or almost weak. Those are some of the physical sensations that I have. Other people might have different sensations, but those physical feelings where you're like, I need to eat something. And maybe even more subconscious than that, just that drive that it's something you need to eat. It's time to eat. So that's what we're going to refer to as hunger. But hunger is not the only thing that drives appetite. And I think we all know this, right? Sometimes we are driven by the second thing, which is wanting, or what we will often refer to as cravings. Now, wanting to eat and cravings often get blamed a lot for why people do not make maybe the best health choices, why they overeat, why they eat, again, those quote wrong foods. And you may blame this a lot too. But wanting and craving is only one of these 7 components, okay? So what is a craving? A craving is sort of this motivation, this desire to consume something. You want to eat the food. I have patients, and this may surprise you if you're someone who has a lot of cravings and a lot of want around food, who will tell me, they come to see me for weight, to lose weight, and they say, I just don't want to eat anything. Nothing sounds good. I've kind of always been that way. And initially, that was sort of a weird thing for me to wrap my head around. How can this person not really be that interested in food, not really like food, and struggle with their weight? But it turns out that wanting and craving is only one of 7 reasons that drives us to eat. So for some people, this isn't a big component of why they're struggling. So wanting or craving is definitely part of what can make some people overeat, but it's really, I think, blamed a lot in society when it's not always the main driver. Okay, but this craving, right? Have you ever had a craving for something? For me, it's often chocolate. I love chocolate. And once I get that idea in my head that I want, like a salted almond dark chocolate, like it's hard to get it out, right? That's a craving. It kind of stays there. Maybe another one for me is a cheeseburger, right? Once I get that idea in my head of like a juicy cheeseburger, it kind of can get stuck there, right? So not everyone has that, but those are, cravings, and they could be anything. Sometimes they can be a surprising thing, or sometimes you have consistent foods that you like and that your body craves. The way to deal with cravings there's a lot of ways we can deal with cravings. So we had an episode about medications. So far, that's been the most popular episode of this podcast. So check that out if you haven't. but medications can definitely help with cravings. Our older medications, our stimulants like phentermine, are often really good to help suppress cravings. They just make people think less about food. So they do suppress those cravings. Contrave, which is that combination of bupropion and naltrexone, is another one that can be really useful for some people with cravings. But maybe you're already on a medication, or maybe you are not ready or not a candidate for medications, or want to try not using a medication. How do we deal with these cravings? The first step is usually to acknowledge the craving, right? Like, ooh, like I'm thinking about chocolate, recognize it. And then you can decide what to do with it. You want to be conscious about it. Sometimes we talk about riding your craving, right? Thinking of it like a wave that you're surfing on. You're just cruise on that craving. You ride the craving until it goes away, because oftentimes it will, right? Now that I started talking about a cheeseburger, I'm like, that's what I want for lunch. But if I have some water, think about something else, eat a different lunch that maybe is also satisfying, that craving might go away. So sometimes we can ride that craving and we can just give it a little bit of time and see if we can eat the food that is more in line with our goals. Other times we may just want to intentionally have that food. Maybe it's been 2 months since you've had a cheeseburger and you're like, you know what? That sounds really good. It's Saturday. I'm going to go get a burger with my friend or go to my favorite place and just enjoy it and move on. Because what sometimes happens with cravings is people work so hard to try to not eat that food they're craving, not eat the cheeseburger, that they end up eating a whole bunch of other stuff instead. And they may have just been better off eating the cheeseburger to begin with. So that's something we want to consider is, do we just ride this craving and let it go and see if we can move through it? Or do we just say, I'm going to enjoy this food and move on? And so those are some ways that we can deal with cravings, okay? You may also substitute it with something else that is a reasonable fit. So maybe if you are currently on a plant-based diet, that's not an endorsement for plant-based, but maybe you've committed to that and you're having a craving for a cheeseburger, maybe you experiment with a plant-based version of that food and see how that feels, see if that satisfies your craving while allowing you to stick with the nutrition plan you're on. So that would be another option for a craving, is a substitution. So again, cravings get blamed a lot when it comes to trying to make health changes, but they're not the main driver. If they are, a medication may help if you really can't escape your cravings. Riding that craving may help, so letting it kind of pass. If it's not happening that often, just embrace the craving and enjoy the food and move on, or substituting it for something that's similar but in line with your current health plans. Okay, so we've talked about hunger and cravings. Kind of in the similar vein with cravings are liking the food, or what we call hedonic pleasure. This is a little bit more of the reward you get from food. So craving is like a little bit of you're thinking about it and you like that food, you want it. It's kind of stuck in your head. You're craving it, right? Liking or hedonic pleasure is you want that reward. You want that brain chemistry boost from the food. So for a lot of people, sweets give this hedonic pleasure. You have your chocolate, you have your dessert, you have your gummy worms, whatever your thing is. And you get this like little brain calmness or pleasure in the brain. Again, this hedonic is the technical word we use for that, this pleasure in the brain. And that could be a savory food, right? Maybe it's quesadillas or maybe it's chicken wings for you, whatever it is, but it's a food that truly brings pleasure. And some people really struggle with that. That is their challenge with food, is that they get a lot of joy from it. It really lights up their brain. So how do you handle this if you're really a hedonic eater, right? You just really enjoy the food. Sometimes these people really describe themselves as foodies, or just really are into baking or really into cooking themselves, and they just truly get a lot of joy and pleasure from the food. This is another one where a medication could be helpful. So Contrave is a medication that I often find the most helpful for that sort of pleasure seeking. I do also have a lot of patients with ADHD who struggle a little bit more with this. The ADHD brain is also often looking for rewards and looking for that stimulation. And so treating the ADHD may be helpful. Same thing, some people with depression struggle with this too. Their brain is looking for something to kind of, give them a mood boost, and food may become that thing. And so if those things are things you've struggled with in the past or that you think you might have, getting treatment for something like depression or ADHD may be helpful too. But some of this is avoiding those triggers. So if you know that gummy worms, for example, are a really big trigger for you and that they light up your brain so much that you just eat the whole bag every time you get it, you may want to try to limit having those easily available to yourself. You may want to set yourself up for success if there's foods that really are big trigger foods that really just reward your brain a lot and you overeat because you get this very big sense of pleasure or reward from them. You may want to keep those triggers around less. You can also use some of those techniques we talked about on the craving side with sort of, if you're finding yourself thinking about that food a lot, trying to ride through that or trying to find a reasonable substitution that sticks with your plan and does bring you some of that pleasure without being something that makes you feel like you're completely losing control or going off plan. But hedonic pleasure, again, is different than a craving. A craving is this desire, this motivation, this wanting of a food. The hedonic pleasure is, again, more something that's rewarding. This can also lead to overeating. This is something I know I have seen for myself is that, especially maybe at a restaurant where food is just really, really outstanding and you have a couple bites of, say, a really amazing cheesecake or molten lava cake for dessert, and you're like, oh, I'm full. I already had this amazing dinner, but this dessert is so good. And with each bite you eat, it's kind of less rewarding to your brain. You're almost trying to chase that first bite, but at the end, you eat the whole thing because you were just trying to chase that amazing, rewarding sensation you had from that food. And so sometimes it can lead to overeating. So sometimes you just have to recognize that pattern for yourself too and say, when I go to a really good restaurant, I'm enjoying the food so much that I sometimes overeat it. What can I do to limit that for myself, right? Should I share things with someone else that I'm eating dinner with? Should I pack up half of it to go before I get there? What can I do to prevent myself from overeating that food that's bringing me so much pleasure? So that may be a strategy there. Okay. Number 4 is something we call satiety. We're going to talk about satiety and satiation, which may be kind of technical words that maybe you are not used to. Satiety, when we use this word, it means the end state of satisfaction, your ability to go from meal to meal without needing to eat again. So satiety is really how long you feel full from that meal. So this may be someone who just feels like they frequently need to eat. You have breakfast and 2.5 hours later, you feel like you need a snack. And then 2.5 hours after that, you feel like you need lunch. And then you feel like you need a snack again. And then you feel like you need dinner. And then after dinner, you're hungry again before bed. And so you end up eating 5 or 6 times a day. And there's definitely a lot of people that have that pattern. I also personally like to eat on a pretty frequent basis. One thing we're starting to recognize and talk more about in my field is that people's stomachs empty into the intestines at different rates. We knew this medically, but I don't think we really were thinking about it in terms of appetite for our patients until more recently. And so some people really may be hungrier sooner. They may truly have that lack of satiety. They weren't satisfied for very long. And an hour and a half or 2 hours later, their body really is telling them to eat. And so there's a couple ways we can overcome that. If you truly are just like, I struggle to go, I would love to just eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but no matter how hard I try, I need snacks in between. There's a lot of strategies we can use for this. So number 1, medications work great for this. And I actually think most of the medications work well for this, whether you're using something like phentermine or whether you're using one of our newer injectable medications that work hormonally. They all kind of help with this particular issue. And some people benefit from both if they really, really struggle with this. You may also just need to recognize that you're someone who needs to eat more frequently, but that you are going to have to make up for that by eating smaller meals, right? So If you're eating 3 times a day and you're trying to stick to 1,500 calories or so a day, you can have 3 500-calorie meals. But if you're eating 5 times a day and you're trying to stick to 1,500 calories, now your meals need to average 300 calories. So that may mean your snacks need to be pretty small and that your meals need to be a little bit smaller. The type of food you eat can make a pretty big impact here too. Protein, as we've talked about in the past, is the best thing that is going to really make you feel that satisfaction, that satiety from meal to meal. So making sure you're getting protein every time you eat can really help with this frequent need to eat. And having a balanced meal as well, right? So if you're having nothing but carbohydrates, that may add to this because you're going to have that go through your stomach and into your intestines a lot quicker. And it's also for many people going to increase blood sugar and insulin and make you feel hungry sooner. So making sure you're having balanced meals that are protein forward are really important if you're that person who feels hungry frequently. Making sure you're getting protein with each meal and possibly focusing on smaller but more frequent meals. And sometimes it's just accepting that, right? If you have really been on this mission that you're just going to eat 3 times a day or that you're going to do intermittent fasting and it never seems to work because you get hungry and you have this desire to eat sooner than what you're supposed to, you may have this lack of satiety. You may not have a very long window between meals. And instead of fighting it, maybe you need to recognize that and change your nutrition strategy to match what your body is doing. Okay, so then satiation is a little bit different. Satiation is feeling done with a meal. And, I think traditionally we have blamed some of those other things like cravings and hedonic pleasure a lot more for why people struggle with their weight. But what we are really starting to see and what a lot of the new medications and surgery and other things actually target is this lack of feeling done. I see this really frequently for my patients. I have patients who come in all the time and they eat really healthy, balanced meals. They exercise and they're struggling with their weight, but they really struggle with portion size. So you can eat really healthy, balanced meal, but if it takes a lot of food to make you feel that satiation at the end of the meal, then you're going to struggle to lose weight because you're just getting in a lot more calories and macronutrients. So if you're struggling with that feeling full from an end of a meal, you have to eat a really large volume of food to feel food. Again, utilizing protein, that one's pretty good at triggering signals of fullness. And then bulking up on vegetables, that can also make you, feel a little bit more full. And then the medications really are truly helpful. Medication and surgery is really helpful for this. If portion size is something you struggle with, you just don't feel satisfied, that really is often a hormonal issue. And that's where medications can be really life-changing. If you feel like you've done all the right things, but it's just really hard for you to ever feel satiated, you just feel hungry all the time, then a medication really can be life-changing. Okay, so then next is fullness. That may sound a lot like the one we just talked about, but this is literally that physical sensation of fullness. I've talked about this before, probably. I tend to use this as my example for this. Tortilla chips are the food I always notice this with. I do not feel any other feeling of satisfaction from tortilla chips until they are like filled up my stomach. Like they're coming up my esophagus. I cannot eat another single one. So maybe there's lots of foods that feel that way for you. Maybe it's just a few foods, but that is a food that I do not feel done with until my stomach is completely stretched out. So that's that physical fullness. And if you like that physical fullness, if that's what your body responds to, then again, medications may be helpful. Those injectable hormonal medications are often really helpful for this. Plenity, which is that capsule that turns into a hydrogel in your stomach and takes up room there with each meal, can be really helpful. And then nutritionally, bulking up on veggies. If you like to feel like there's a lot of food in your stomach, then you really want to, honor that to some degree, but fill up your stomach with low calorie, high fiber foods like low calorie vegetables. So whether that's like lettuces or broccoli, asparagus, Brussels sprout, cauliflower, but really make like half of your plate, if not more, veggies so that you're getting a cup or 2 or 3 of vegetables with each meal so you can get that physical fullness. You get a bunch of bites, you get that stretch feeling without overeating and eating too many calories or too many macronutrients. Okay, so that's fullness. And then last is one that I kind of forget to think about. So I was glad that I kind of broke this down today. But it's what we call prospective food consumption, which is a fancy way of saying how much food you want to eat. So this is kind of an interesting one, but this is sort of that I'm going to eat 3 pieces of pizza mentality. Or a lot of times people will tell me, I'm really excited. I'm just going to have a really big dinner, right? It's thinking about Thanksgiving. I'm going to have a big plate of food. Or I always think of Eileen from Seinfeld with her big salad, right? It's a big salad. Like it's thinking about how much quantity you want. And some of that's conditioning, right? We think about having a big meal on Thanksgiving, or maybe we think about our favorite restaurant. We think about a big burrito from that place, right? Our brain has sort of already committed to the size of that portion. And so this is one where habits and working on your thought processes can be really helpful, right? So instead of thinking like, I'm going to have 3 slices of pizza, that's what I always have. Like, okay, like what's going on there? Let's do a little bit of work behind that. Like, is this a habit? Is this something where we're used to not feeling satisfied from that? So do we need to use some other techniques to get there? Is this just a behavior thing? And medications may certainly help with this too, but this is one where if you just have that habit of eating really large portions or looking forward to that, doing a little bit of mind work on like, why is it that I, always eat that amount? Is it just habit? Some of this can come to that cleaning the plate mentality too. Where did that come from, right? Are you an adult now? Do you no longer need to worry about cleaning your plate? No one's putting that pressure on you. So those would be some things around this prospective food consumption, which is again, how much we want or expect ourselves to eat. Okay, so we covered a lot there. Some of that was a little bit technical, but the biggest thing I would encourage you to do here is not to just blame everything on simply overeating or eating the wrong things. There really are various components of appetite. So in quick review, we have hunger, which is that drive to eat. We have wanting or craving of food. We have getting that hedonic pleasure from food. We have satiety, which is how long you're full from meal to meal. We have satiation, which is how satisfied and when you feel done with eating. We have fullness, which is that feeling of physically being full. And then we have this prospective food consumption, or how much food you want to eat. And you may struggle with one of those mostly. You may struggle with 2 or 3, or maybe a little bit of all of these. And if you can identify which of these things is making you struggle at dinner time, or struggle with snacking, or struggle when you go out to eat, then I think you can make some progress in changing some behaviors, changing some nutrition strategies, changing your mindset around food, and maybe giving yourself grace, right? Recognizing that these are just real things and that we all have these different patterns. They're not character faults. They are biologically driven. There's differences in our bodies and how we respond to food. And if all the nutrition strategies and behavior strategies you have been working on to change these aren't helping, medications often can target these. And if you can identify which of these things you're struggling with a little bit more than others, that may help your doctor figure out which medication or what strategy like surgery or Plenity or other techniques that we have may actually help you as well. So your homework for today is to start looking for these patterns. The next time you feel like you eat too much or eat the wrong things or get yourself too full, take a little bit of time to pause and reflect. Don't judge yourself, but figure out what's going on. Is it that you really do need to eat more frequently? Is that what your body needs? Do you get a lot of pleasure from food? And how can you modify things from that? Do you never feel satisfied? Do you never feel like you're done eating? You could always eat a little bit more. Do you have a lot of cravings? Are you just thinking about food all the time? Do you just hungry all the time? Why? Why are you hungry all the time, right? So if we can start identifying these, then we can make changes. So, over the next few days, I want you to start to pay attention. What's going on? Are you hungry? Is this a craving? Is this more of just you want the pleasure of the food? Do you not feel full? Do you not feel satisfied? And try to start labeling those things. Labeling does not mean judging. We're not judging ourselves. These are not character flaws. cause. These are just what our body does. But if we can start labeling these sensations, then we can start making nutritional changes, behavior changes, or possibly find a medication that's the best fit for you, okay? So that's your homework. Start paying attention to which of these things is driving you to eat, and I will look forward to sharing more with you next week. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Dr. Francavilla Show, where we learn about all things related to weight and health. If you love this podcast, make sure to leave those 5-star reviews and share this podcast with a friend or loved one. If you have a topic about weight and health you want me to tackle, head over to the website, thedrfrancavillashow.com to submit your question. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss next week's episode. Take care.